What's up, guys? Tonight I'm going to answer the Q&A thread that I posted up this morning. Looks like I have some pretty good questions on here, so I'm going to go ahead and go over those. First question is, how do you assess new clients and the inability to absorb certain foods? And he names one of my clients as an example, someone who had long-term or long-time gastro issues, and after working with you, you pinpointed things and he was even able to eat things he'd never eaten before. So really, first and foremost, you can use an elimination type diet. Eliminate obvious culprit foods. What I notice with a lot of people, especially consider the fact that he's a bigger guy, so he's eating a pretty good amount of food. But even a smaller person, you're still eating more volume of food than what the body's typically naturally gonna want to eat. Things like, especially when you start putting in a lot of vegetables and things like that. First and foremost, I look at probably inflammation's one of the big things. He had some inflammation issues. Once I eliminated all the culprit foods, inflammation went down, but it's figuring out which of those actual foods causes the issue, and that's when you can start reintroducing things if you choose, or you can just leave them all out. I mean, there's no rule that you have to eat this or you have to eat that. If you feel good, then just roll with it. But obvious culprits being things like dairy. For a lot of people, certain types of dairy I notice are worse than others. I noticed that mostly more processed dairy is a little bit worse. Things like fermented dairy products, or things that I shouldn't say fermented, or like aged cheeses, yogurts that are heavy in probiotics. Those don't tend to mess with people quite as bad, so you might try those if you're kind of weary of dairy. Otherwise, just get rid of it. And then obviously lactose can cause issues. Even if someone's just mildly lactose intolerant, enough quantity of lactose is gonna cause an issue, obviously. So that's one. And another is, people are gonna probably hate me for saying this, but gluten is another one. I don't care if you're allergic to it. Most people aren't. But it does seem to be more inflammatory just from what I've seen in people eating it, especially when they eat it on a regular basis. So if you're having it once in a while, probably not an issue. But I noticed with me, and I noticed with a couple other people, that if they have it, for example, for a refeed, they'll have some swelling and inflammation that they wouldn't have if they were to have something that didn't have it in it. So are they allergic? Am I allergic? Absolutely not at all. I can eat it. I'm not going to die. I'm going to go into shock or anything like that, or end up in the hospital, or even get a rash or anything like that. It's just the fact that it is more inflammatory, and we're already eating inflammatory foods, things like meats that have a lot of omega-6 fatty acids in them. We're already getting a lot of inflammation from training, and inflammation's good to an extent. You just don't want your gut inflamed. That's one thing that you don't really want inflamed. So cool thing about that is, once you can eliminate a lot of those foods and inflammation goes down, the gut is really good at healing itself, and I'll talk about this in another question. The gut heals itself really quickly. It's kind of like the liver, only it heals a lot quicker. It actually replaces all the cells in the gut lining, and it'll heal itself if you can stop bombarding it with inflammation and give it healing nutrients. So things like any kind of soothing ingredient will work really well. Anything like a probiotic that can replenish gut flora, a quality probiotic product, or fermented foods. Another thing is making sure that there's enough stomach acid. If a person's just digestion generally slow, introducing a betaine product, something like that might be useful. Some really good soothing products, things like peppermint oil extract. Peptogest is the one that I really like. Has a nice coating on the soft gel. Seems to work pretty well. Making sure that you're digesting each macro well. For example, some people have problems with fats. They digest really slow, backs things up. So making sure bile acid's up. D-limonene a really good one for that. Making sure liver's healthy, because that's where a lot of the bile is coming from. Anyhow, there's a number of things you can do. There's a huge amount of things that I look at, but in general, I'm looking at foods and trying to get rid of the foods. Too much fiber, high food map foods, things that pull a lot of water into the stomach, and you can find lists of these foods online. It's not difficult. you'd be surprised how many bodybuilding type foods will be on that list. People that overconsume things like certain vegetables, oats, for example, get bloated, feel like shit all the time, and they think, oh, I got to eat these foods because it's bodybuilding food, when really it's just causing problems. So be wary of that. Kind of do a little bit of research on that. So inflammation, swelling, retention. You might even need a lower food volume. You'd be surprised what just lowering food volume will do for you huge veggie eaters out there. Just be careful. So things like that, there's really a lot. It's extremely person specific, but I think that kind of gives you a good start as to what to look for. When can a normal cycling female whose cycle ceased 4 weeks before competition usually expect to get it back? And does having higher fat, lower carb diet seem to help push things along, provided that the fats are omega rich? So hormones are like fat and cholesterol based mostly. So yes, fat will be helpful. I don't think it necessarily needs to be omega rich, although I do encourage a good amount of omega-3 fatty acids. I think that's important, and that your ratio of omega-3s to 6s and 9s isn't really skewed, hence why a lot of people supplement with omega-3s, because we just don't get enough through the diet. So yes, that is important, but also remember that saturated fats are really big when it comes to hormone balance. Assuming you're getting them from good sources, things like grass-fed beef, grass-fed butter, even grass-fed yogurts. And if you can get grass-fed and grass-finished, grass-fed's it's the amount of difference in fatty acid profile is there. It's not super impressive. If you can grass-finish as well, that's even better. So kind of look for that. Some companies are starting to label that a little bit more clear because people are looking for it. So saturated fats are also very important, but things like testosterone, for example, it's not necessarily the hormone we're looking for here, but it's cholesterol plays a huge part in production of testosterone, creating the molecule. So it's just make sure that you are, you're getting plenty of cholesterol in your diet. Eggs, pastured eggs, those are awesome. So saturated fats from the right sources are really good. Keep that in mind. Add those in along with just more fats in general. I don't necessarily know that lower carb. Obviously, if your fats are higher, you're getting your calories there, so you are going to lower carbs. But if you just need calories in general, then just don't be hesitant to get those via fats, and you can still have carbs in your diet. Do your nutrient timing and all that. So yeah, that's definitely good. As far as when to expect to get it back, no idea. It just depends on the person. One thing I can say is that it tends to be a little more body fat related for a lot of people rather than just time and calorie related. Caloric intake does matter, definitely matters. Time and a surplus definitely matters. But I notice for a lot of girls that have a lot of problems with this, that simply gaining body fat back is one thing that will start it quicker. So just know that if you're trying to stay leaner, it might take a little bit longer for this to normalize. I don't think that there's anything horribly wrong with this necessarily. It's just kind of, weigh the options and realize, hey, my cycle might not come back very quick. Might take a little bit longer. And honestly, I've actually wrote a little article about this a while back. This is kind of something that you have to make some judgment calls with at times. There's girls that probably haven't had cycles in God knows how long, and they're otherwise healthy. You draw blood, they're fine. There's a couple hormone imbalances, obviously, that aren't letting their cycle start. But in general, they're healthy, and if they're okay with that and realize there could be some consequences, and depending on what their life goals are with fertility and all that, some people don't care, some people do. Just realize that you will probably have to gain fat back to get a cycle back, and if you're not okay with that, then that's kind of a moral line that I don't really cross with people. I relay the information, and then they can kind of do with it what they want. So that is that. Now, next question, because I'm talking way too much. What's the best approach to building a lagging body part when you try multiple different training techniques for a period of time and no change and the rate of growth. Arms, for example, trying high volume, low volume, BFR, drop sets, supersets, etc., etc., etc. Someone else asked about legs too on there. So frequency seems to be pretty safe bet on most things. Now, when they're asking about legs and arms, obviously there's some things you have to consider there. The recovery demand for leg training, depending on what you're doing, is definitely going to be more so than arms, not only from a muscular standpoint and caloric standpoint, but from a CNS standpoint. So, if you're trying to do max effort squats 5 times a week, you're probably going to be in big trouble. It's not going to work. You're going to burn out. With arms, you could probably darn near train them every day if rotating something as simple as rotating in traditional work, traditional, progressive overload, although progressive overload with arms is kind of difficult, even though you definitely can do it if you track your progress and are diligent about it. But doing your traditional things like non-straight sets, heavy sets, maybe some drop sets, maybe some supersets, things like that, and then adding in cell swelling work in there on the off days, or just blood volume work in general. That's where you might put in your BFR. Cell swelling sets is high enough reps to produce that effect, and then you can kind of get the best of both worlds that way, and you're still able to recover because that blood volume type work isn't super demanding on the CNS, and it's pretty easy to recover from, just as far as how it breaks down the muscle tissue. Not nearly as bad as your traditional weight training. So you can do both. I know right now personally my arms have grown the most from doing arms pretty much I think it's just about every single day on my program, which is about 4 days a week, and that's been the best. Haven't really had any problems with recovery, been able to keep doing it. And then from there, once you'll start hitting a point where you're not really progressing, or you feel that maybe your joints are starting to hurt, or you're kind of overusing the arm, they're getting a little loose, soft, and not as full and hard, or you're losing that inflamed effect, then you might just drop them for a while. Might take a couple weeks rest where you don't do them, or no direct arm work. Let them heal, let the new tissue form, so on and so forth. Retry the cycle. So arms, you can do a ton of frequency. They get used so much. It's kind of like calves. They get used indirectly constantly during the day, directly and indirectly. So just keep that in mind when you're, frequency wise with arms. Now with legs, you can do something similar, though you probably might need to go a tiny bit lower frequency than that. This person says, I'm pretty sure that I'm under the assumption they're only training 1 time a week. In that case, you could definitely go to 2 days. You're perfectly fine doing 2 days. If you need to bring the intensity down for the days to recover, then you can do that, or maybe just less sets to failure within each workout. You could even do a hamstring day, or hamstring focus day, a quad focus day. Obviously, you'll hit the opposite muscle indirectly on a lot of the exercises, but you could do something like that. 2 days a week, plenty. You could easily do 2 main leg days and add in that cell swelling work beyond that point, and I don't see why there would be any problem recovering with that whatsoever. And that's a ton more volume within recoverable volume still. So that would probably be my go-to as far as from what this person's saying, that they're only training legs once a week. Next, to expand on my last GH question, which was on the last Q&A, opinion on using peptides and GH with GH on off days. So he says something like Monday through Friday with weekends off, peptides on the weekends, or even GH to 4 days a week only, which are training days, and peptides on the rest days. So basically the same thing. Yeah, you could definitely do that. You're getting a pulsatile effect with the peptides. They're pulsing the natural release of growth hormone. In theory, that's going to be beneficial. It's going to let your pituitary gland work on its own. On the days that you're not using it, you're still getting a good pulsatile effect. You can definitely do it that way. Some people even run peptides with GH on the same day. It's kind of Timing's a little bit trickier. I won't go into that because that's not what he asked. But I think that in general, the idea of taking the days off, because somebody else asked too, why not? Why not just if cost is no issue, then why not just stay on it? I don't like the idea of that, and I covered this in the last one too, just from a insulin sensitivity standpoint. If you're running any significant amount, your blood sugar is going to get out of control eventually. You're going to lose insulin sensitivity eventually. I don't think people monitor this well enough, and I think next thing you know, you're pre-diabetic, you're diabetic, bam, so on and so forth, or you kind of cancels out the effects because you're losing insulin sensitivity. So I think that's a good balance, like he's talking about, the rotating the two, the peptides and the GH. And the peptides, in theory, would be a little bit easier on the insulin sensitivity side of things. So if you ran those on the off days when you're less insulin sensitive, it might make a little more sense, at least in my eyes. But think about the fact that they're still causing a rise in blood sugar. They definitely do, depending on which peptides you use. Some are a little worse than others. So don't think that they don't. I would always monitor blood sugar and just overall signs of insulin sensitivity resistance when you're on GH and peptides. So remember that, but I don't see anything wrong with that. Someone else asks on there, take on generics, and they said that 4 IUs got them to 272 from 107 starting point. You get people that argue till their death that it's shit and that they don't work. If it's dosed correctly, it's going to work. There's plenty of labs out there to prove it. That's it. As long as it's dosed correctly, it should work just as well. Some people claim that there's like anti-diuretic hormones in some of these companies, and that's what's causing water retention, and it's just giving you the quicker, more gratifying weight gain through water and so on and so forth. But the fact of the matter is, if it's real, it's real. So whether somebody makes it or it's prescription or whatever. So yeah, even if it's underdosed, if you need to use more, if it's still more cost effective than that, I don't see why that's really a huge issue. Just know what you're getting. He also says on here, I was using GH 8 IUs per day for a while, but dropped it in the weekend and moved it to Monday through Friday for insulin sensitivity reasons. And yeah, we kind of talked about that last time, and I just briefly mentioned that. So keep that in mind. 2 more here. We talked briefly about HCl supplementation a few days back. I believe I have low stomach acid along with some minerals. He named some minerals here. But also healthy stomach lining, as we'll get into. I used to use HCl supplements. So basically, he used to use HCl supplements and apple cider vinegar, and now he cannot, and he's worried that his stomach lining is damaged. And that's what's causing issues. So I mentioned above, stomach lining heals itself. It creates new cells very, very quickly. It's great at healing itself. If you feel that that's an issue, and he mentions the Heidelberg test on here, which, and he says that it's not available on LSH. Yeah, you're going to have a hard time finding someone that's going to do that. Specialists might. But in general, if you're not bombarding the stomach with something that's inflammatory and something that's damaging it, then it should be able to heal itself. Now, if it doesn't, even though there's no negative stimulus, then you probably have an issue, and then you probably need to maybe look into a test like this. And then obviously avoid the things that are going to irritate it in the first place because it's not able to heal itself. He mentions being deficient in zinc, selenium, and several other needed minerals for HCl production. Yeah, that could be true, but the fact that when he takes HCl, he's having issues with bloating and things of that sort, I wouldn't push the issue too much, just because you maybe start at a very, very low dose until you can heal the gut lining. So plenty of good gut bacteria, maybe even something like glutamine. That's one of the few times I think glutamine's kind of useful, is in healing the gut. I found it really good in really high doses. So that is something worth trying. Any type of those soothing ingredients that I mentioned earlier. And then this could be a case where I might look into a test like that. And if none of those things work, and I mentioned probiotic too, but the probiotic issue, you know, some people talk about stability and solution, if they're worth a shit, anything, you know what I mean? So there are a few out there, and if you have any questions on the specific one, I can refer you to one, but really high dose, at least initially, to build up gut flora. And I think in the future too, there are going to be some more tests on just gut health in general. I think there'll be some more awareness on that and more options in that regard, at least I hope. So that would be where I would start. Last one, what do you think about longer cycles like EQ 600 and test SIP 250 for 16 weeks? Is it more beneficial than something like test only for 12 to 14 weeks, or test each week 500 and more easy to recover PCT, keep your gains? No, it's not easier to recover, I wouldn't say. I mean, at that point, I don't think 12 to 16 weeks is going to make much difference, unless it's like a matter of one is 500 and one is 2 grams. Then yeah, there's going to be a difference in recovery ability. But in general, what you're mentioning, I highly doubt it you would notice much difference. That's a pretty small difference. I mean, it's not like either of those are huge amounts. You're shut down. The test production is not happening. So if it is, it's very, very little. If you had blood work and look at LH and FSH, they'd probably be pretty much 0. That's what you see when most people are on. So I doubt that would make any difference. As far as results go, yeah, one could argue that the shorter ones might be a little bit better. A lot of people become stagnant after a while, and it's just not beneficial to keep running it any longer. Might as well run it shorter, be off for less, go back on, and do it that way. Probably easier to recover from a health standpoint the shorter it is. From an actual hormone standpoint, I'm not too sure that I would expect much difference. He asked about PCT specifically, so no, I highly doubt there would be a whole lot of difference. I mean, if it was 30 weeks versus 12, then probably, but in this case, I don't really think so. So I think that covers all the questions. I just talked for 22 minutes. Holy shit. So I'll let you guys go. I hope this was useful to everybody. If you guys have any follow-up questions on anything I answered, I try to a lot of these are scenario based, so I try to answer them the best I can. Just because I don't necessarily know the whole situation, but I try to give some scenarios and give you guys answers. So I hope you enjoyed the video, and everyone have a good night.